You're firing me? While I'm hooked to a morphine drip and a heart monitor? I rasped, voice cracking. Grayson didn't flinch. Just click to the next slide. My job title vanished from the org chart like I never existed. No warning, no discussion. 21 years erased in one Zoom call, while I lay cut open in a hospital bed. And then, before the nurse could stop it, a notification blinked across the screen. Your system access has been revoked. No insurance, no severance, no voice. But what Grayson didn't know was that I still had the audit files. The ones the board buried in 13. The ones that could destroy him. But before we begin, let me know where in the world you're watching from today. It's always fascinating seeing who's joining us from around the world. My name is Jack Reamer, and I'm 53 years old. After 21 years running Midwest logistics operations, my office still smells like diesel fuel and burnt coffee. My assistant Linda keeps the paperwork flowing while I manage our fleet of 38 trucks and 6 warehouses. Grayson Vick, our new CEO, who's barely 40, strides through quarterly meetings in tailored suits, talking about modernization and throwing sharp looks my way. My stomach tightens every time he mentions legacy systems, code for people like me. What he doesn't know is that steel cabinet in my basement holds enough dirt on his past turnarounds to bury his career. The board trusted me with that audit for a reason. But I stay quiet, do my job, and keep those files locked away. Let me start from the beginning. I'd been ignoring the stomach pain for weeks. You know how it goes. Pop a few antacids, wash them down with coffee, keep pushing. We had a massive shipping backlog thanks to Grayson's aggressive new quotas, and I couldn't afford downtime. 21 years of perfect deliveries wasn't about to end on my watch. The morning it hit me, I was doing my usual 6 a.m. warehouse walkthrough. The familiar smell of rubber tires and cardboard usually settled my nerves, but that day, everything felt off. My coffee tasted like metal. The fluorescent lights were too bright. Then came the knife twist in my gut that dropped me to my knees between rows of shelving. Linda found me there, curled up and sweating. "Jack, you're white as paper," she said, already dialing 911. "This isn't normal." I tried arguing, but could barely speak through the pain. Ever had your insides try to claw their way out? That's what it felt like. The EMTs loaded me up quick. Last thing I remember was watching the warehouse ceiling tiles blur past overhead, thinking about the afternoon shipping manifest. Crazy what your mind latches onto when your body's falling apart. I woke up 3 days later in the ICU, feeling like I'd been gutted by a forklift. Which wasn't far off. Turns out my gallbladder had basically exploded. Emergency surgery, complications, the works. I had tubes running everywhere and enough morphine in my system to sedate a horse. The antiseptic hospital smell made my head swim. Time got weird after that. Nurses came and went. Doctors muttered about infection rates. I drifted in and out, mixing up spreadsheet numbers with fever dreams. The only constant was the steady beep of the heart monitor, counting out minutes I should have been working. On day 3, when I was finally clear-headed enough to worry about work, a message pinged on the hospital tablet. It was from Grayson's assistant. "Quick zoom to align on coverage, 2 p.m. My first thought was relief. The boss checking in, showing concern. Maybe I judged him too harshly. "Can you help me look presentable?" I asked the nurse. She adjusted my bed, angled the tablet so the IV lines weren't visible. I even managed to smooth down my hair a bit. Professional pride dies hard, you know? I watched that meeting countdown tick away, mentally rehearsing status updates. Our Q3 numbers were solid despite the backlog. The team was handling things. I'd be back soon. Grayson's face appeared right on time, wearing that thin smile that never quite reached his eyes. "Jack," he said, "I'll keep this brief." Behind him I could see slides already queued up. Something cold settled in my stomach that had nothing to do with surgery. "We're restructuring the logistics division," he continued. "As part of our modernization initiative, your role has been eliminated. Effective immediately." The heart monitor started beeping faster. I tried to speak, but my throat closed up. The room tilted sideways, while Grayson's voice droned on about transitional periods and shifting paradigms. Some HR rep I'd never met chimed in about COBRA benefits. "Your system access will be terminated at the end of this call," Grayson said. "HR will courier any personal effects from your office." He paused, probably waiting for me to beg or argue. I just lay there, tubes everywhere, staring at his pixelated face while my pulse hammered in my ears. The monitor was screaming now. A nurse rushed in, checking readings. Through the fog closing in, I heard Grayson say something about best practices and future opportunities. Then the screen went black, my company email already shut down mid-call. I pressed the nurse's call button with shaking hands, not because of pain, not because of fear, because of rage, pure, cold rage that burned through the morphine haze like acid. 21 years of loyalty, and this was how it ended? A Zoom call while I lay gutted in a hospital bed? Grayson's face filled my screen, that practiced CEO smile already in place. Behind him, I could see his sleek office with its modern art and city views, quite a change from my warehouse desk with its coffee ring stains and family photos. "Jack," he said, "I'll keep this brief since you're recovering." His tone was all corporate smoothness, like he was reading from a script. "As you know, we've been evaluating operational efficiency across all divisions." My heart monitor's beeping picked up speed. I'd sat through enough restructuring meetings to know where this was headed. Still, some part of me refused to believe it. Not now. Not like this. "We're implementing an aggressive streamlining initiative," Grayson continued, sharing his screen. An org chart appeared, boxes and lines shifting like some corporate shell game. I watched my name fade from the logistics division, then vanish completely. 21 years disappeared in a PowerPoint animation. "Your position has been eliminated, effective immediately." He clicked to another slide. HR bullet points in cold, clean font. No mention of severance, no transition period. Not even a thank you for those countless late nights and missed family dinners. "But my medical coverage," I started to say. The words came out raspy, my throat dry as sawdust. A notification popped up in the corner of my screen. "Your account access has been revoked." Just like that, decades of emails, contacts, and performance records, gone. My entire professional life, locked away with the click of an IT button. "HR will be in touch with the necessary paperwork," Grayson said, already reaching for his mouse. "Focus on your recovery, Jack." The Zoom window closed, leaving me staring at the hospital's default wallpaper, peaceful clouds drifting across an empty blue sky. The humiliation hit harder than any surgical pain. My hands shook as I pressed the nurse call button, needing someone, anyone, to acknowledge I still existed. The sharp beep of the button felt pathetically satisfying. Numbers started spinning through my mind. Mortgage payments, insurance premiums, my daughter's last year of college. The fluorescent lights seemed to pulse with each new calculation, each fresh wave of panic. How many months could I stretch my savings? Would anyone hire a 53-year-old logistics dinosaur in this market? Then, cutting through the static of anxiety, a memory surfaced. My basement workshop at home. The steel cabinet bolted to the concrete wall. Inside it, files from that confidential audit I'd run for the board years ago, paper records Grayson couldn't delete with a keystroke. The nurse came in, checking my vitals. "Your heart rate's elevated," she said, adjusting something on my fore. "Try to stay calm." "When can I be discharged?" I asked, already calculating. If I could get home tomorrow, maybe I could make it down those basement stairs. The surgical staples would protest, but I'd managed worse pain during the 8 crisis when we worked 30-hour shifts to save the company. The nurse frowned at my monitors. "That's up to the doctor, but you've got at least another day here." I nodded, letting her think I was concerned about my recovery. But my mind was already in that basement, picturing the cabinet's combination lock. 21,853, the number of years I'd served, the crisis year that proved my worth, and my age when they'd trusted me with that audit. A combination I'd chosen because it meant something. Unlike Grayson's sleek digital systems, some things couldn't be wiped clean with a click. I got discharged the next afternoon, though discharged makes it sound more dignified than it was. My daughter Amy had to help me shuffle from wheelchair to car like some arthritic penguin, while a nurse rattled off care instructions that mostly boiled down to, Don't lift anything heavier than a coffee mug. The drive home felt surreal. Streets I'd traveled thousands of times looked different now. Maybe because I wasn't racing to solve some warehouse crisis. Or maybe because pain meds make everything fuzzy around the edges. We passed the East Side Distribution Center, where I'd spent so many Thanksgivings tracking holiday shipments. The loading docks were busy as ever, trucks backing in and pulling out like nothing had changed. But everything had changed, hadn't it? Amy helped me inside and tried to steer me toward the bedroom, but I waved her off. "Just need to check something in the garage," I said, trying to sound casual. She gave me that look daughters give fathers who are being stupid about their health. "Dad, you heard the nurse. Rest first, everything else later." 10 minutes, I promised. "Just want to make sure everything's locked up." It wasn't exactly a lie. I did need to check locks, just not the ones she was thinking of. The garage had been my command center during natural disasters and supply chain emergencies. We'd coordinated flood relief shipments from that concrete floor, planned alternate routing when tornadoes closed highways. Now it was just storage, boxes of Christmas decorations, old sports equipment, and behind it all, that steel cabinet bolted to the back wall. I shuffled past Amy's old bicycle and reached for my key ring. Except it wasn't there. Because my keys were still attached to my company badge, probably sitting in some HR bin along with my parking pass and 21 years of loyalty. Son of a... I caught myself, remembering Amy was still hovering in the doorway. "Everything's fine, honey." "You can head home. I'm just going to sit in my workshop chair for a bit." After she left reluctantly, I tried calling HR. Got routed through their automated system 3 times before landing in a voicemail box that was apparently full. Typical. Even when they're firing you, they can't be bothered to pick up the phone. I started going through drawers in my workbench, hoping I'd stashed a spare key somewhere. The search got harder as evening settled in, had to keep stopping to catch my breath, staples pulling every time I bent wrong. Found old shipping manifests, maintenance, logs, even a birthday card from the warehouse crew, but no key. Finally had to admit defeat around midnight. Shuffled back inside, took my meds, and collapsed into bed. Spent hours staring at the ceiling, mind spinning with questions. What if I couldn't get that cabinet open? What if whatever was inside didn't matter anymore? What if Grayson had already covered his tracks better than his predecessor? Pain jolted me awake before dawn. Laying there, hand pressed against my side, something clicked in my memory. That awards dinner after we survived the 8 crisis. The board had given me some fancy plaque, outstanding leadership in critical operations, or something equally corporate. I'd been embarrassed by the attention, more comfortable with spreadsheets than speeches. But I remembered playing with that plaque during late nights at my desk, and hadn't I hidden something inside the frame? A backup key, tucked away because, even then, some part of me knew you couldn't trust corner offices to stay loyal. Took 20 minutes to get down to the garage again. Found the plaque buried under old training manuals. My hands shook as I worked a flathead screwdriver under the frame's edge. The backing popped free with a crack that echoed off concrete walls. There it was, a small silver key taped inside, right where paranoid past me had hidden it. I held it up in the gray dawn light filtering through dusty windows. Such a small thing to pin hope on. That cabinet held files I'd chosen not to burn years ago, when burning them might have been smarter. Names, numbers, creative accounting that would have ended careers if exposed. I'd kept them out of some misguided sense of company loyalty, or maybe because deep down I knew someday I might need leverage. The key felt cold and heavy in my palm. All I had to do was stand up, walk those few steps, and find out if my insurance policy was still worth anything. I shuffled past Amy's old bicycle and reached for my key ring, except it wasn't there. Because my company badge, with all its keys, was probably already deactivated and sitting in some HR bin, 21 years of access, gone in one Zoom call. "Dad," Amy called from the house. "You okay out there?" "Fine, honey. Just reminiscing." My fingers traced the outline of an old plaque mounted near the cabinet. Our team award from the 8 crisis. The memory hit me like a warm breeze. The all-hands meeting where we'd celebrated surviving that nightmare year. Back then, doing things right had mattered more than looking good on quarterly slides. I waited until Amy's footsteps faded, then pried that plaque off the wall with a screwdriver from my workbench. My hands shook a bit, but there it was, the spare cabinet key, still taped to the back just like I'd left it years ago. Sometimes paranoia pays off. The lock clicked open with a satisfying chunk. Inside, banker boxes sat exactly where I'd stacked them, each labeled with year codes that would look random to anyone else. But I knew what they meant, the quiet audit the board had asked me to run, checking for funny business in our regional numbers. I dragged the first box across the concrete, wincing as my stitches pulled. The lid came off in a cloud of dust that made me cough. Inside, rubber-banded stacks of vendor reconciliations and freight variance maps filled manila folders. But what I really wanted were the red-tabbed sections, the anomalies I'd found tied to divisions run by a certain ambitious young manager named Grayson Vick. Back then, I'd buried all this to protect the company. We were barely hanging on after 8. Investor confidence was fragile. The board had agreed, better to quietly clean house than risk public scandal. But now, reading through these old spreadsheets under my workbench light, I saw something uglier than creative accounting. Grayson had booked phantom volume through what we called ghost warehouses, facilities that existed on paper but never handled actual freight. He'd logged prepaid vendor credits that never matched to real receipts, and somehow his historical KPIs always got better after mysterious roll-forward adjustments that no one could explain. My phone's camera clicked as I photographed page after page. The sound felt like small victories, even as my surgical sight throbbed. This wasn't just old rot I was looking at. This was Grayson's playbook, the same pattern he still used to juice his numbers and justify aggressive expansion plans. The pain meds started hitting hard around midnight. I'd filled my phone's memory with document shots, but my vision was going blurry. Someone at board level needed to see this. Fast. But who would take my call now that I'd been officially terminated? Most of the old guard who knew me had retired or been pushed out in Grayson's modernization crusade. I slumped in my garage chair, feeling the weight of what I'd found. The evidence was solid, maybe solid enough to stop Grayson's latest empire-building scheme. But without internal allies or system access, I might as well be shouting into the void. My eyelids grew heavy as the meds pulled me under. When I woke, hours later, drooling slightly on my workbench, one name floated through the painkiller haze. Marla Winters. She'd retired from the board last year, but she'd been there during the 8 audit. More importantly, she'd been the one board member who always chose truth over optics. If anyone would look at these numbers objectively, it would be Marla. I reached for my phone, but my hand froze halfway. What if she'd drunk Grayson's Kool-Aid too? What if she thought I was just another bitter old-timer who couldn't handle change? The documentation sat in neat stacks around me, damning in its detail. But would it be enough? I started with the official channels first thing next morning. Seemed right, you know. 21 years of playing by the rules made it hard to jump straight to guerrilla tactics. The board office number was still in my contacts. I'd called it enough times during quarterly reviews. Good morning, this is Jack Rimmer. I need to speak with someone about an urgent compliance matter. The receptionist's voice went from honey to steel the moment she checked my status. I'm sorry, Mr. Rimmer, but we don't route calls from former employees through the board office. You'll need to contact HR. Look, this involves potential securities violations. The board needs to... Click. Ever tried arguing with a dial tone? About as productive as explaining logistics to a brick wall. Speaking of walls, I hit them everywhere I turned. My carefully worded email to Investor Relations bounced back. No surprise there, since Grayson's team had killed my company address mid-Zoom. Real classy move, that one. The kitchen timer dinged, reminding me it was time for another round of antibiotics. I dry-swallowed the pills while scrolling LinkedIn on my phone. 2 board members I knew had public profiles. I crafted careful messages about historical accounting concerns, but kept it vague. The system flagged both as potential spam. Apparently, algorithms don't care about fraud any more than Grayson did. My surgical site throbbed. Doctor's orders had been clear about avoiding stress during recovery. Fat chance of that. The financial pressure was building faster than the physical pain. HR still hadn't sent COBRA paperwork, which meant my insurance status was floating in limbo. Short-term disability? Blocked because of my unpaid leave status during the firing. Real convenient timing there, Grayson. Remember that old saying about burning bridges? I was watching mine go up in smoke, one corporate firewall at a time. Each failed attempt tightened the noose around my neck. Grayson's restructuring wouldn't wait for my stitches to heal. I slumped at my kitchen table, surrounded by printouts of benefit policies I could barely focus on. My phone sat there like a dead weight. One name kept catching my eye in the contacts list: Marla DeWitt. She'd retired from the board last year, but back in the day, she'd been different. When everyone else played politics, Marla stuck to facts. She'd backed my analysis during the 8 crisis when other directors wanted prettier numbers. But reaching out to her felt like admitting defeat. Pride's a funny thing. It can keep you warm even when you're drowning. I must have picked up that phone 10 times before I finally hit call. It went to voicemail, of course. Her recorded voice was exactly as I remembered: crisp, professional, no nonsense. The beep felt like judgment. Marla, it's me. My voice cracked a bit. Blame it on the meds. Grayson fired me from the ICU. I still have the ledger. 7 words that cost more than all my failed official attempts combined. I hung up before I could ramble, then sat staring at the phone like it might bite. Would she even remember that old audit? More importantly, would she care? Loyalty had an expiration date in our industry, usually right around retirement. The timer dinged again. Time for more pills, more waiting, more wondering if I'd just wasted my one real shot at justice. The late morning sun slanted through my kitchen window, hitting the phone screen where Marla's contact info still glowed. I'd done what I could. Now, it was her move. The kitchen timer's ding had barely faded when my phone lit up with Marla's number. My hands shook a bit as I answered, partly from the meds, partly from relief at seeing that familiar name flash on the screen. Jack. Her voice carried that same crisp authority I remembered from 100 board presentations. I got your message. Are you mobile? More or less. Still got stitches, but I can drive. Good. My house, tomorrow morning at 9. Bring everything you have. She paused. And Jack, I'm sorry about what happened. That's not how we used to do things. I knew her place well. A sprawling ranch-style home where she'd hosted strategy retreats back when leadership still believed in face-to-face connections. The next morning, I pulled into her circular driveway, moving slower than I liked with 3 binders and a thumb drive weighing down my laptop bag. Marla met me at the door in one of her trademark neutral pantsuits, silver bob gleaming in the morning light. She'd always dressed like she was heading to a board meeting, even in retirement. Some habits die hard, I guess. You look like hell, she said, leading me through to her kitchen. The room smelled of coffee and lemon cleaner. Sunlight bleaching the white tiles, almost painful, bright. Feel worse, I admitted, easing into a chair at her breakfast table. But this couldn't wait. She poured us both coffee in heavy ceramic mugs, the kind that meant business, not those delicate things from the executive dining room. Start from the beginning. I walked her through it all: the Zoom ambush in the ICU, the emails going dark, the scramble to find that spare key. Her expression stayed neutral, but I caught her fingers tightening on the mug when I described Grayson's smirking restructuring speech. And these? She gestured at the binders I'd spread across her table. Remember that quiet audit you commissioned back in 2013? The one we buried to protect investor confidence? I opened the first binder to a red-tabbed section. Well, I found a pattern. Grayson was running regional operations then, and these numbers. I pointed to a series of vendor reconciliations, ghost warehouses, phantom inventory, pre-booked revenue that never materialized. Marla's glasses caught the sun as she leaned forward. And you think he's still using the same playbook? I know he is. These variances? I flipped to another tab. They match exactly what he's reporting now to justify the expansion. He's just moved the decimal points. She sat back, coffee forgotten. The board votes on that expansion package Friday morning. My stomach clenched, and not from the surgery. Friday? That's only 4 days. Yes. She pulled out her phone, thumbs moving rapidly. I'm still in contact with 3 sitting directors. They've had concerns about the pace of Grayson's plans. But they need more than concerns to block a vote. How much more? Everything you have, formatted for the audit committee. Clean, clear, and completely bulletproof. She looked up from her phone. Can you do it? I thought about my stitches, the pain meds I was supposed to take every 6 hours, the doctor's orders about rest and recovery. Then I thought about Grayson's face on that Zoom call. I'll need access to a printer and maybe some stronger coffee. You'll have both. She stood businesslike. But Jack, 4 days means 4 days. If we miss that vote, the financing goes through, and Grayson's numbers become everyone's problem. I nodded, already reaching for the thumb drive. Then we better get started. Marla cleared space on her dining room table, a massive oak affair that could have doubled as a conference room setup. Use whatever you need. I'll make calls, test the waters with the directors I trust. She paused. How are your stitches holding up? They'll hold, I said, but we both heard the strain in my voice. 4 days to turn decades, old paper records into a digital smoking gun. 4 days to prove I wasn't just another bitter ex-employee with an axe to grind. 4 days to stop Grayson from doing to the whole company what he'd done to me. The next 2 days blurred into an endless stream of spreadsheets and coffee at Marla's dining room table. Every few hours, I'd pop another Tylenol and try to ignore how the stitches pulled when I leaned forward to squint at her monitor. These vendor signatures, I said, tapping the screen. Look familiar? Marla adjusted her glasses, frowning at the PDFs I'd extracted from my archive. They're identical. Not similar, pixel, perfect identical. Copy-pasted across 6 different contracts. Dates changed, but the same executive signature. Thing is, that VP left the supplier 2 years before some of these were supposedly signed. The morning light caught dust motes dancing above stacks of printouts and sticky notes. Reminded me of dawn shifts in the warehouse office, back when we tracked inventory on clipboards and actually talked to people face to face. Now everything was digital, sealed behind firewalls I couldn't access anymore. We need to document chain of custody, Marla said, starting a fresh legal pad. Every file, every screenshot, where it came from, when you saved it, who else touched it. Defense counsel will try to paint this as fabricated evidence from a disgruntled ex-employee. My stomach clenched at ex-employee, but she was right. I walked her through my filing system, explaining how I'd backed up key reports during the original audit. The ghost warehouses were the smoking gun. Addresses that looked legitimate in isolation but geocoded to empty lots or residential neighborhoods. No dock doors, no inventory, just paper locations inflating Grayson's regional capacity numbers. I've got a contact still in finance, Marla said, reaching for her phone. Let me see if the current roll-ups match this pattern. While she stepped out to make the call, I pressed a hand to my forehead, definitely running a fever. The doctor had warned about pushing too hard post-surgery, but what choice did I have? 4 days was now 2, and we still had gaps. Marla returned, looking grimmer than before. My source confirms it. The quarterly aggregation method hasn't changed. They're still rolling up phantom volume the same way you found back then. I nodded, trying to focus through the pain med fog. That's good news, right? Shows the pattern held? It helps. But Jack, she sat down heavily. We need current system screenshots, transaction-level detail from the new ERP. Without access to prove these old methods carried forward, they'll say I'm connecting dots that aren't there. I rubbed my eyes. I know. The afternoon sank into cross-referencing external records I'd saved over the years. Carrier invoices, freight audits, anything that could triangulate around the gaps in our evidence. Every spreadsheet tab felt like another stitch pulling loose. By sunset, my hands were shaking too badly to type. Go home, Marla ordered, watching me struggle to focus. Get some actual rest. We've got a foundation, but you're no good to anyone if those stitches tear. I wanted to argue, but the room had started spinning slightly. She was right, again. I gathered my laptop with clumsy fingers, trying not to think about all the damning data still locked behind my deactivated company credentials. 21 years of institutional knowledge, and now I couldn't even pull a basic inventory report. "We're close," Marla said, walking me to the door. "The vendor fraud pattern is clear, but tomorrow we need to pressure test every number, every assumption, one weak link. And the whole chain breaks," I finished. I remember the drill. The drive home was a blur of streetlights and nagging questions. What if the strongest proof was still trapped in the system, just out of reach? What if we had the puzzle pieces, but couldn't quite show how they fit? My fever spiked as I pulled into the garage, and for a moment I just sat there, head against the steering wheel, wondering if I had enough fight left for what came next. The surgical incision throbbed as I hunched over Marla's dining table that evening, staring at our half-finished presentation. My phone buzzed, another message from my doctor warning about elevated temperature and infection risks. I ignored it, just like I'd been ignoring the growing heat under my bandages. "Lost him," Marla said, hanging up her phone with unusual force. "It's running some kind of system-wide audit. My finance contact's credentials are frozen." My heart sank. Without current data access to validate the historical pattern, we had a stack of old files and speculation. "How bad?" "Bad enough. They've locked down everything since last quarter." Marla pulled off her glasses, rubbing her eyes. "Jack, maybe we should—" "Don't say it." The words came out sharper than intended. "Sorry, it's just—" I gestured at the scattered papers, each one a piece of the puzzle we'd spent days assembling. The room felt too warm, my skin too tight. Remember those late nights prepping for big customer audits? The smell of vending machine coffee, fluorescent lights humming while you triple-checked every number? This felt the same, except now, I was the one under scrutiny. Without corroborating data, they'll say I doctored these files after getting fired. I pressed an ice pack against my side, trying to cool the growing fever. A bitter ex-employee looking for revenge. "Which is exactly what Grayson will call you," Marla agreed. "He's got the board eating out of his hand with those expansion projections." I started packing up the files, defeat settling heavy in my chest. 21 years of loyalty reduced to a box of suspicious paperwork. My hands shook as I reached for the thumb drive. That's when Marla's phone lit up. She read the message, then looked at me with sharp focus. "Board's nervous." My hints about financial irregularities hit home. "They've called an emergency session tomorrow morning." She paused. "I got you 5 minutes." 5 minutes? The room spun slightly. "Marla, we've got hours of material here." "Then we cut it down. What's the clearest shot?" I closed my eyes, thinking back to my warehouse days. When a system crashed, you didn't have time for complex explanations. You showed the break, showed the fix, moved on. "The pattern," I said, opening my laptop despite the pounding in my head. "We strip everything down to the basic math. 3 slides. Ghost warehouses, vendor contract duplicates, and the revenue roll-ups. Raw numbers that any director would flag in their own business." Marla nodded, already pulling key documents. "Make them fear their own liability." Smart. We worked through the night, my fever climbing as we distilled days of analysis into minutes of presentation. Every slide had to land like a hammer. Every number had to tell the story without interpretation. I kept an ice pack pressed against my side, fighting to stay focused. "Your doctor will kill me," Marla said around midnight, watching me swallow more Tylenol. "Add him to the list." I managed a weak smile. "Behind Grayson and probably half the board tomorrow." She touched my arm. "Jack, are you sure about this? In your condition?" The concern in her voice nearly broke my resolve. I looked at the timeline we'd built, years of careful fraud, each step calculated to look legitimate in isolation. Only the pattern revealed the truth. Like those old loading dock security cameras. One frame showed nothing, but string them together and you caught the theft in action. 5 minutes, I said, saving the final deck. "That's all we need. Make them see the pattern, make them worry about their own necks when the auditors come." Marla studied me for a moment, then nodded. "Get some rest. I'll pick you up at 7. I gathered my files with shaking hands, each movement sending fresh pain through my side. The fever made everything feel slightly unreal, like those hazy moments just before the ambulance arrived at work. But this time, I wasn't collapsing. This time, I had one clear shot to make things right. The morning storm matched my mood as I adjusted my laptop's camera angle in my home office. Thunder rattled the windows while I dabbed sweat from my forehead, trying to look somewhat professional despite 3 days of stubble and dark circles under my eyes. You know that feeling when you're about to step into the spotlight and your whole body screams to run? Yeah, that was me. My phone lit up with Marla's text. Link coming. 7 directors confirmed. Then the video conference invitation hit my inbox. My hands shook slightly as I clicked to join. The Brady Bunch squares filled my screen. Faces I recognized from years of quarterly reviews, now peering at me from airport lounges and corner offices. Some looked irritated at the early hour, others wary. I spotted at least 2 checking their watches. Good morning. Marla's voice cut through crisp and authoritative. I've asked Jack Romer to present urgent findings relevant to today's expansion vote. As many of you recall, Jack architected our Midwest turnaround during the 2008 crisis. I shifted in my chair, a sharp twinge from my incision reminding me to sit straighter. Thank you, Marla. I appreciate the board's time on short notice. You have 5 minutes, Mr. Romer, the lead director said. We have a full agenda today. I shared my screen and launched into the presentation we'd spent 2 days distilling. In 2013, I conducted a confidential audit at this board's request. The findings were sealed to protect company stability during recovery. However, recent events compel me to resurface critical patterns. My first slide mapped the original audit scope. I kept my voice steady despite my racing pulse. We discovered systematic irregularities in regional reporting, specifically volume inflation through phantom warehouse locations and circular vendor credits. Several directors leaned closer to their cameras. The CFO's face had gone slightly pale. I advanced to slide 2, showing highlighted sections from Grayson's old divisional reports. These red flags traced directly to territories under Grayson Vic's management. False addresses, duplicated signatures, mathematical impossibilities in the roll forwards. I zoomed in on specific examples. This wasn't sloppy bookkeeping. This was engineered deception. The board's general counsel raised his hand. Mr. Romer, these are serious allegations. Can you authenticate your source materials? Yes, sir. I have the original files, chain of custody documentation, and I'm prepared to provide notarized statements. I patted the stack of binders beside me. But more urgently, look at slide 3. I brought up the comparison showing how Grayson's historical performance metrics fed directly into the expansion projections awaiting vote. The same pattern underlies the growth assumptions in today's proposal. Ghost facilities, circular accounting, inflated throughput. The entire financial model rests on manipulated data. Silence fell. One director was frantically thumbing through papers. Another had pulled out her phone, presumably texting the financial team. The lead director's face had turned to stone. I moved to pause the vote pending full review, said a voice I recognized as the audit committee chair. These allegations warrant investigation. We have commitments to stakeholders, another director countered. Delays could jeopardize. So could fraud charges, Marla cut in smoothly. I suggest we prioritize fiduciary duty over scheduling convenience. The lead director held up his hand for silence. Mr. Romer, you understand the gravity of what you're presenting. I met his gaze through the camera. Yes, sir. That's why I'm here, despite doctor's orders to rest. I shifted slightly to ensure my medical dressing was visible. I've given 21 years to this company. I'm not here for revenge. I'm here because someone needs to protect its integrity. He studied me for a long moment, then turned to the general counsel. How quickly can your team validate these materials? If Mr. Romer provides everything immediately, we could have preliminary findings by end of week. All in favor of postponing the vote pending investigation? Hands began rising in the video squares. I held my breath, counting silently. The lead director surveyed the screens, then nodded slowly. Motion carries. Mr. Romer, please coordinate with counsel to transfer your documentation. This meeting is adjourned pending further notice. I clicked through to my first slide, forcing my voice steady despite my racing heart. This timeline shows the original audit scope from 2013, specifically focused on our regional performance metrics. The familiar data felt like solid ground under my feet, even as my stitches pulled. A gravelly voice cut in, General Counsel Mike Peters, who I'd worked with during past vendor disputes. Before we proceed, I believe we need management present for this discussion. Specifically, Mr. Vic. Several directors nodded. The lead director spoke. Agreed. Ms. Chen, please locate Mr. Vic immediately. Mr. Remmer, continue while we wait. I advanced to the vendor reconciliation slides, the ones that had kept me up nights at Marla's dining table. These highlighted entries show prepaid credits booked, but never matched to actual shipments. The pattern repeats across multiple quarters. The CFO, Alan Mercer, leaned closer to his camera. I'd always known him as more numbers guy than confrontationalist. Now, his face had gone slightly pale as he recognized his own reporting templates. If you'll note Section C, I continued. Freight bills for warehouse locations in Memphis and Tulsa show consistent volume, but when cross-referenced with carrier invoices, I highlighted the discrepancy. No actual shipments occurred. The addresses resolved to vacant lots. A new square popped into the grid. Grayson, clearly in motion, camera jolting as he walked. His usual polish was missing. His tie looked hastily knotted. "What's this about?" he demanded. "I'm heading into a client meeting." The lead director's tone could have frozen mercury. "Mr. Vic, we're reviewing some concerning patterns in historical performance data. Contract Series MT-447 and TL-229 specifically." "Ancient history," Grayson scoffed. "Legacy system noise from before the ERP migration." Is this really board-level priority? I felt a familiar surge of warehouse floor righteousness, the same energy that had pushed me through countless inventory crises. "Actually, Mr. Vic, the pattern is quite current." I switched to my statistical analysis. "These identical revenue smoothing entries appear in your Division 8 reports from 2017, then repeat in Division 12 last quarter. The probability of matching anomalies occurring naturally across separate business units is effectively zero." Alan Mercer's face had progressed from pale to ashen. He knew these numbers intimately, had likely processed them himself under pressure from above. "Directors," Grayson's voice had taken on an edge, "this is clearly a vindictive play by a terminated employee. I made necessary staffing changes to modernize operations." From his hospital bed, Marla interjected icily. "We need the raw data files," the lead director said. "All of them. Now." I watched Grayson's jaw clench through the video feed. "Of course, I'll have my team compile everything. But first, I really must." His image froze, then disappeared. The reconnecting message spun lazily. "Ms. Chen," the lead director didn't miss a beat. "Please ensure it preserves all relevant records immediately. Mr. Mercer, you'll work with audit to verify these findings." Alan Mercer nodded jerkily, likely seeing his own career flash before his eyes. "Yes, sir. I'll pull the quarterly roll forwards right away." The general counsel cleared his throat. "Given the potential scope, I recommend suspending all pending strategic decisions until we complete a thorough review." "Agreed," said the lead director. "Mr. Remmer, please transmit your source files to my office directly. The board will require your continued cooperation." I sat straighter despite the pain. "You'll have everything within the hour, properly indexed with chain of custody notes." 21 years of operational discipline showed in that moment. They knew I documented everything. The squares began winking out as directors left to manage the fallout. Marla's face lingered last, giving me a small nod before disconnecting. I sat alone in my home office, thunder still rolling outside, staring at the empty meeting window. The familiar hum of my laptop fan filled the silence while my presentation slides glowed on screen. Simple cells and figures that had just detonated like precision charges under Grayson's polished facade. My incision throbbed, but for the first time since the hospital, I barely noticed the pain. A new meeting invitation popped up, the audit committee, scheduled for 2 p.m. They'd want to dive deeper into the data, verify every decimal point. I knew the drill. The real question was, where was Grayson, and what explanation could he possibly craft that wouldn't crumble under forensic scrutiny? The video feed stabilized as Grayson found a quiet corner, his face tight with barely contained anger. The general counsel's voice crackled through. "Mr. Vick, we need clarification on these vendor reconciliation discrepancies." Look, this is clearly a vindictive play by a terminated employee. Grayson shot back, but his usual smoothness had an edge of desperation. "Legacy systems always have noise in the data. I can have my team pull current numbers." "We're looking at current numbers," the CFO interrupted, his voice stronger now. "These patterns match our active reporting structure. Mr. Reamer, can you show the Memphis cross-reference again?" My hands were steady as I shared the screen. The familiar rhythm of explaining logistics flows took over. This was my world, my expertise. Note the consistent booking of outbound volume from this facility code, but when we check actual carrier invoices, I highlighted the key cells. No corresponding shipments exist. The listed address is an empty lot. "That's impossible," Grayson snapped. "I personally reviewed those facility metrics last quarter. Internal audit has confirmed the physical location status." General counsel added quietly. "Mr. Vick, we're also seeing nearly identical irregularities in performance reports from your previous two divisions. The statistical probability—" "I need to consult with my team," Grayson cut in. His video tile froze, then disappeared. The lead director cleared his throat. "I move we suspend the expansion vote pending full review. All in favor?" A chorus of ayes filled my speakers. What followed was a blur of procedural motions. The board entering closed session, management excluded, my hands shaking as I digitally signed affidavits and transmitted archive files. When the meeting finally ended, I sat back in my chair, exhausted. The surgical site throbbed. My phone buzzed, a text from Marla. "Well done, now we wait." The next 48 hours crawled by in a haze of painkillers and paperwork. Cobra forms demanded attention, while forensic accountants called with endless clarifying questions. I'd explain warehouse coding systems, then ice my incision, walk through carrier contracts, then check my temperature. Each ring of my phone sent my heart racing, but it was never the final word. You ever notice how time moves differently when you're waiting for justice? The seconds drag like hours, but the hours blur together until you lose track of days. The resolution, when it came, arrived in 3 rapid-fire notifications. First, Marla's text. "Board notified SEC. All expansion initiatives frozen. Cause, proceedings initiated." Then the formal HR email, stark in its corporate finality. "Employment agreement with Grayson Vick, terminated for cause. Effective immediately." Finally, my LinkedIn feed lit up with industry chatter. Grayson's profile had already changed, his confident headshot now paired with that most desperate of headlines. "Looking for new opportunities." I sat in my garage workshop, staring at those updates while the morning sun crept across my workbench. The same bench where I'd built shipping models late into the night, back when I thought loyalty meant something. The air still held traces of sawdust and machine oil, honest smells that had nothing to do with corporate politics. The painkillers were wearing off, but for the first time since the surgery, the ache felt clean somehow, like the kind of soreness you get after setting things right. My phone lit up again. Another text from Marla. "Regulatory teams arriving tomorrow. Your evidence package broke the dam. Well done." I traced my finger over the surgical scar beneath my shirt. 2 weeks ago, I'd been bleeding in a hospital bed while Grayson smiled through my termination. Now he was the one hemorrhaging, reputation, credibility, maybe soon his freedom. A delivery truck rumbled past my garage, and the familiar diesel sound triggered something in my mind. Not nostalgia exactly, but recognition. I knew logistics, knew how to make things move, track, deliver. 21 years of experience didn't vanish just because one company did. My eyes drifted to the empty wall above my workbench. For the first time since this all started, I felt something like possibility stir in my chest. The space looked about right for a business sign. I watched 2 forensic accountants pack the last of their folders into sleek briefcases. For 14 straight days, they'd camped in the board's secure room, cross-referencing every detail I'd surfaced about Grayson's creative math. Now, they had what they needed for the SEC filing. Your documentation was meticulous. the senior auditor said, adjusting her glasses. Most whistleblowers bring emotion. You brought evidence. I nodded, thinking of those long nights at Marla's dining table, building the case while fighting fever and surgical pain. Numbers don't lie if you know where to look. The next morning, HR's settlement packet arrived by courier, back pay, benefits continuation, and a severance package that matched my original contract terms. The letter cited administrative error in termination processing, corporate speak for, "We screwed up and hope you don't sue us more." You know what's funny about revenge? The best kind doesn't come from destroying your enemy. It comes from building something better from the ashes they left you in. I took one look at that settlement check and knew exactly what I was going to do with it. Remember that garage where I used to stage emergency relief shipments? The one with the steel cabinet that brought down a CEO? Over the next week, I transformed it into something new. Stripped out the old shelving, installed proper lighting and climate control, added a conference table made from reclaimed shipping pallets. The smell of sawdust and fresh paint replaced decades of diesel and cardboard. The sign was the last touch, brushed aluminum letters that caught the morning light. Iron Ledger Ops. Simple, strong, and straight to the point, just like the service I plan to offer. Because if there's one thing I learned in 21 years of logistics, it's that numbers matter more than narrative. Marla stopped by as I was hanging it. "Perfect name," she said, running her finger along the metalwork. "Reminds me of that old saying about iron sharpening iron." "Speaking of which," I said, "how's our friend Grayson doing?" She smiled that razor-sharp smile I remembered from board meetings. "Not well. SEC investigation is just the start. The regulatory filing triggered automatic notifications to his previous employers. They're all launching internal audits now, his patterns becoming very visible." I thought back to that Zoom call in the ICU, his smug face as he cut me loose. And the industry grapevine? Dead silent. Recruiters won't touch him. Too much liability risk. She paused, pulling out her phone. "Which reminds me, I have a mid-sized shipping company looking for a forensic audit. Board wants someone who knows how to spot creative accounting and logistics. Interested?" "First client already?" I had to smile. "You work fast. Word gets around. The guy who caught Grayson cooking the books? The one who documented everything so clean the SEC fast-tracked it? Yeah, he does independent audits now." She shrugged. "Quality speaks for itself." The next morning, I stood in my driveway watching sunrise hit that new sign. Steam rose from my coffee mug, the same one I'd used during countless warehouse inventories. My surgical scar twinged, a reminder of how close I'd come to losing everything. But I hadn't lost. I'd rebuilt. Better yet, I'd rebuilt by doing what I'd always done, following the numbers, documenting the truth, and trusting that facts would matter more than fancy presentations. The sound of another car pulling into my driveway broke my reflection. Probably my new clients, early for our first meeting. Before heading in, I looked up at that sign one more time and said what I'd learned the hard way. Loyalty's not weakness until you spit on it. I believe stories like this find us for a reason. If this one touched you, please subscribe. I share a new one every day, and tomorrow's might be the one your heart's been waiting for.